Part 55. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 543. When the emperor was completely indulged in pleasure and jealousy, Qin Xiang had already taken over half of the burden on his hands. Even though he still had to obey the emperor's orders on the surface, Qin Xiang, who has always been talented in tongues, always had a way to achieve himself desired goal. Prime Minister Qin used this to achieve many of his goals, collecting money and power, doing it handily, but also maintaining the operation of the empire. Qin Xiang has always been sitting under the emperor and above the ministers. Even if Emperor Jinjian suspected him, he never thought of rebelling or helping others change the dynasty, because he knew that he was the safest when Emperor Jinjian was alive. But he didn't expect that in just 3 years, because of Emperor Jinjian's suspicion and a small trick, things would develop like this in the end. Although all the ministers and common people demanded to kill him, he was confident that as long as he could see Emperor Jingyan alive, he would be able to coax the other party to save his life, and it was true. But the onlookers knew that everyone was still looking forward to the court's rectification of the chaos, but he had already seen the collapse of the Great Zhou. He was able to sit in this position, and his accurate vision was the most important thing. There are too many rebels, and De Zhou can't suppress it. When a new regime is established, De Zhou's royal family must be the first to be eradicated, and his Qin family will be next. Qin Xiangji did not just want to make the Qin family rich and powerful, but there was only one way to get rid of this situation. Let the kingdom of Jin or Xixia annex Dazhu, and he was in Xixia at the time. With the right time, place, and people, he took all three aspects. But today, he took the initiative to send Emperor Jinjian off, not only to show their righteousness as a monarch and minister, but also to show his loyalty to 11 Xia. He executed Emperor Jinjian, and the second prince would definitely push him to take the blame. In this way, he had nothing to rely on except Xixia, and Xixia could rule Dazhu better by holding his handle. As for how long the second prince can be a puppet, he should not consider it. The emperor looked at the poisoned wine on the table, and felt sad and angry for a moment. He was still immersed in Qin Xiang's words of reproach, and said angrily, "If you were not too corrupt and bent on seeking power and profit, how could I come out? This is the next move." Qin Xiang laughed and said, "Isn't that all connivance by the Holy One?" The family members were suppressed by the emperors of all dynasties so that they couldn't hold their heads up, but when they came to the Holy One, the aristocratic clan gradually flourished again. You allow the aristocratic clan to enclose land and set up hermits. We will wait for you. What's wrong with officials following suit? Qin Xiang was also a little funny when he said this. He would say these evasive words to the emperor. He raised the jug and poured a glass of wine, handed it to the emperor, and said with a smile, "My lord, it is useless to talk more, the sky is dark now. Morning, hurry up and get on the road, the queen might still be waiting for you on the road." The emperor's eyes widened and his hands trembled slightly. Even though he had expected to die, he was still afraid when it happened. He looked at Qin Xiang, who was holding the wine glass firmly, and suddenly Fuzi asked in his heart, "Why did you come to deliver the poisoned wine yourself? Are you afraid that the second child will use you to apologize to the world?" The emperor suddenly thought of the Xixia commander he met today, and his expression changed. Your Majesty," Qin Xiang interrupted him, "the guards outside are all Xixia soldiers. Do you want the minister to see you off, or let the outsiders come in and see you off?" Emperor Jingyan was silent for a while, and finally stretched out his left hand to hold the wine glass, closed his eyes, and drank it down in one gulp. Qin Xiang was also nervous, and was staring at him closely, so he didn't realize that the emperor was using his left hand. Seeing him throw the wine glass to the ground, he was relieved. The poisonous wine prepared for the emperor was of course of the highest quality. Within a quarter of an hour, the emperor quietly closed his eyes. There was no blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. He looked as if he had fallen asleep. With some ruddy Qin Xiang tested his breath, sighed, and then turned to go out. The Xixia guards came in to check and proved that the person was dead, so they withdrew and gave up their position to the guards of the Great Zhou Palace. The second prince's confidant, the eunuch, walked in on his knees, and together with several inner eunuchs carefully lifted the late emperor to the bed, and helped him arrange his clothes. Although Emperor Jinjian had already dressed, after tossing and tossing for so long, the clothes were still a little wrinkled, and the crown was not straight enough. Emperor Jinjian is dead, but the honor he deserves will not be less. This inspection found his hand. There was blood on the fingers of Emperor Jinjian's right hand. The eunuch frowned slightly and wiped off the blood with a handkerchief. He was about to put his hand into his sleeve when he saw the sleeve. There was something abnormal in him, his heart trembled, he hurriedly lowered his head to cover up his expression, then turned to an inner eunuch and said, "Go and report to the Holy Majesty, the late emperor is fully dressed, the Holy Majesty can come here." The little eunuch thought that the second prince was coming, so he stepped back and ran to report to the second prince. The second prince is not stupid. Hearing what the little eunuch said, he knew that his personal eunuch was hinting at his past. He didn't dare to see the late emperor's face at first, but now he had to go, so he got up and said that he would go to the late emperor to fulfill his filial piety. Commander Xixia and Prime Minister Qin had no objection, and watched him leave. Qin Xiang's eyes sank slightly, and he said, "I didn't expect that. I was wrong. The second prince is more ruthless and vicious than I imagined." He thought that the second prince would never see the emperor's remains. The second prince walked quickly into the tent. He knew that there are eyeliners everywhere now. Prime Minister Qin has been in business for many years, and the power in the palace will even be higher than him, so he knelt in front of Emperor Jinjian's bed as soon as he came in, tears bursting out. Seeing the second prince crying, the inner eunuch in the room didn't dare to stay for a long time. The second prince's close inner eunuch waved his hand and everyone retreated. Seeing that there were only two people in the room, the personal eunuch hurriedly showed the emperor's sleeve to show the second prince. When the second prince saw the words on it clearly, his face turned livid immediately, and then turned pale. He looked at his father lying on the bed with a different expression, waved his hand to let the inner prisoner back down, and then stepped forward to hug his body and wept bitterly. Emperor Jinjian was dead. The second prince transported his body back to the palace, and formally issued an edict that he would be enthroned as emperor in 3 days. It wasn't that he was in a hurry, but that he had to be in a hurry. Immediately after Emperor Jinjian died, there were many generals. Fuzhou officials clamored to take the side of the Qing emperor, but in fact it was a rebellion. He knew that his throne was unorthodox, but throughout the dynasties, there were many unorthodox thrones. Those who have the ability to sit firmly will not sit firmly in the end, and later generations will have mixed reputations. Anyway, he didn't know what happened after his death, so he didn't care about the reputation. But on the eve of his enthronement, Qi Ziyuan's army finally arrived at Linan City, and surrounded the West Gate and South Gate in one fell swoop. Before the second prince had time to persuade Qi Ziyuan to surrender, in the evening, General Yuan's army also arrived outside the city gate and directly surrounded the north and east gates. The second prince was silent for a moment, and asked, "I ordered all the places to guard the city, why did the two of Yuan and Qi come here without hindrance? Why didn't they report?" The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 544. The ministers were silent, but the second prince saw their slightly resistant attitude, and he narrowed his eyes slightly. Obviously, those officials who let Qi Ziyuan and General Yuan go did not recognize him as the emperor in their hearts. At this time, outside the city, Qi Ziyuan was reading a secret letter. He burned the letter, turned around and smiled at Rongxian. "Mr. Li and the children are safe." Rongxian smiled and said, "Congratulations, General." He lowered his eyes and thought for a while, then said, "It's just that Master Qi is still in Linan City." Qi Ziyuan lowered his eyes and said, General Yuan's family is inside, we just need to follow General Yuan's actions. Rong Xian nodded, the time has not come, this is indeed the best way. Any news about the 8th and 10th princes? Rong Xian shook his head, our people have not been found, we have lost track of them, should we send more people? Qi Ziyuan thought for a while, then shook his head and said, forget it, it's just 2 children of a few years old. Let's deal with the affairs in Linen City first. Unlike Qi Ziyuan, General Yuan sent most of his men to look for the 2 princes. He would never allow the second prince who murdered his father and brother to become emperor. In that case, he would only be able to find 2 princes and protect them to ascend the throne. General Yuan dispatched his men, and now he had time to send a message to Qi Ziyuan, asking him to come to discuss important matters. Qi Ziyuan went to General Yuan's camp frankly with only a team of people, which made General Yuan admire even while he was satisfied. General Yuan only thought that Qi Ziyuan wanted to help the little prince ascend the throne just like him, so he just cut to the chase with a few simple reminiscences. At the same time, they must find the 2 little princes as soon as possible. After all, a country cannot live without a king. Qi Ziyuan was silent for a moment before agreeing, but he hoped to join forces with General Yuan to enter the city and rescue the family members of the generals first. Qi Ziyuan was worried, and said, don't be afraid of the general's jokes, Ziyuan's eldest son is only 2 years old this year, and I haven't seen him since he was born. General Yuan thought of his old mother, wife, and grandchildren trapped in Linen City, his eyes turned red, he patted Qi Ziyuan's shoulder empathetically, and said, okay, but there are a few people I can get here. General Yuan is a bit hard to say, he is far more powerful than Qi Xiu, has been in business longer than him, and has more and better manpower than him, but most of his manpower has been sent out to find the 2 princes, and few of them can be drawn out. There are few, so if we want to save people, I'm afraid that Qi Ziyuan will have to send more people. Qi Ziyuan obviously didn't expect such a situation, feeling in his heart that General Yuan was indeed dedicated to the outside world, so he could only recruit as many people as possible to sneak into Linen City quietly. Fortunately, Fan Zijin was still inside, and the people who ran them before were still lurking in the city. After sending people into the city, they waited for the other kings who worked hard, and at the same time they waited for news from the city. And the second prince moved very quickly, invited Mrs. Shen and Qi Feng to the tower the next day, and asked General Yuan and Qi Ziyuan to go to the city alone to have an audience. Both of them are unwilling to recognize the second prince as the emperor, so how can they talk about seeing each other? Not to mention that they couldn't get out after entering alone, so General Yuan and Qi Ziyuan just looked at the people on the tower with red eyes without saying a word. The envoys of the second prince grabbed Mrs. Shen and Qi Feng and threatened them for a long time. Seeing that the 2 were completely indifferent, they became angry for a while, but they didn't dare to push them down or cut them off, so they could only turn around and let them go. Report to the second prince. And Shen Mu and Rong Xian led their staffs to finally draft a call to action, listing the crimes of the second prince, saying that they followed the way of heaven to crusade against the second prince. The second prince's response was simple and rude. Yuan Qi and the others asked people to retreat for 20 miles first, or they would each kill one of their family members until they retreated. General Yuan's eyes were tearing apart, his heart was full of pain and hatred, but there was nothing he could do. When he saw his little grandson on the city wall the next day, he could only wave his hand and make people retreat 20 miles to camp. They all led troops to besiege the city. This time the second prince didn't threaten them again, but 2 days later, after General Guo and King Qin's army also arrived, the second prince's envoys quietly left the city and entered the camps of the generals, including General Yuan and Qi Ziyuan. Qi Ziyuan watched the envoys back disappear, and then let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and walked to the small slope beside him. Standing on it, he asked, Jinyu, how do you think General Yuan will choose? Rongxian lowered his head and thought for a while, that position is too tempting. Although General Yuan devoted himself wholeheartedly to serving the country, he often disobeyed the late emperor's will. I couldn't grasp his thoughts. Besides, even if General Yuan didn't have that idea, his subordinates not necessarily not. General Yuan cherishes his reputation very much, Qi Ziyuan said pointedly. If we can rescue the family members of Yuan's family and take action before him, do you think General Yuan will raise the flag to fight against us again? Rongxian frowned and thought for a while. General Yuan really cherished his reputation, valued his reputation more than his own life. If they were so kind, maybe it would really work. However, we are not completely sure. I don't know where Mr. Biao. No, Qi Ziyuan refused. You can't involve Zijin in this matter, there are not enough manpower. He thought for a while, and said, order Bailey, let him come here immediately. The envoy has just arrived, we can delay it for 3 days. In about 3 days, the hostages must be rescued. Where is the lady and the young master? With Aling here, Bailey is good at concealment and killing, and Aling is good at defending. With her there, Bailey is dispensable. Rongxian responded immediately, and Fei Ji sent a letter to Bailey to come immediately. But at this time, General Yuan, who also sent Qi Chen away, seemed to be 5 years old. Yuan Zhao stepped in quickly and shouted, "Father!" General Yuan said wearily, "The 2 princes are dead, at the hands of the Xixia people, and the other princes in Linen City are all, the entire Great Zhou, now only the 2nd prince is left." Yuan Zhao was silent for a moment, then said, "Father, the Guo family also has other clans. The late emperor was not the son of Emperor Gong, but his nephew." General Yuan cheered up a little. Yuan Zhao lowered his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Father, the most urgent task now is to rescue grandmother and mother, otherwise the 2nd prince has hostages in his hands, and we will not be able to attack at all." General Yuan nodded slightly, "Bring everyone back, find a way to sneak into the city, and we must rescue them." Yuan Zhao felt a little anxious in his heart. It will take 2 or 3 days for our men to rush back, and we are afraid of making mistakes under the exhausted army. "Father, why don't you ask General Qi for help? Isn't his men already in the city? Grandma is getting old, I'm afraid she won't be able to wait too long." General Yuan sighed, nodded, and said, "I'll see General Qi tomorrow." Because the upper echelons of each army already knew that all the princes were dead except the 2nd prince, and even the 8th and 10th princes who escaped originally were found and killed by the Xixia people, so everyone's hearts were fluttering and they were ready to move. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 545. Mu Yangling and the others lived not far from Linen City. Back then, their 2 carriages traveled at a medium speed for only 3 days, and the flying pigeon passed the letter to Mu Yangling that night. Bailey hurried back the next day, and it took only 1.5 days to arrive. After listening to Qi Ziyuan's instructions, Bailey only had one request, and he wanted Zhu Liang to assist him. Qi Ziyuan raised his eyebrows slightly, and Bailey explained, "The 4th grandmother prepared a lot of ways to survive, and Zhu Liang participated in the whole process. He is most familiar with Linen City. There are many Yuan family members. He wants to bring everyone out. I don't think it can be done, but if there is the previous arrangement of the 4th grandma, it will be a little more possible." Qi Ziyuan emphasized, "It's not just the Yuan family, but also the Qi family. It is far from possible for Qi Xiu to let the Qi family stay in Linen City and become a threat to him, so he naturally wants to bring them out, even though they are not very important to him." Bailey understood, and sneaked into Linen City early the next morning after resting all night. At the beginning, Mu Yangling thought of many ways to leave Qi Mansion and Linen City. For this reason, he asked people to stand guard at various intersections in Linen City and record the patrol and defense situation of the entire city. Although it took a long time, they still sent the graph is drawn. Above, the patrol route of the Imperial Army, when and where they arrived, and when and where they changed their defenses were all clearly recorded, and the streets of Linen City were naturally also recorded. In addition to several sets of plans made by Mu Yangling, Bailey directly selected one of them to improve after reading it. In this way, their time was shortened. Now people are still locked in the palace, but because there are adult men among them, this time they are not under house arrest in the harem, but in a courtyard at the corner of the palace, where 5 officials and their families nest together. Fortunately, a courtyard of the palace is equivalent to the 5-entry house outside, and it can be separated. The second prince's move was for the convenience of guarding, but for Bailey and the others, it was for the convenience of stealing people out. There are quite a few UN family members, and there will be even more Qi family members. In a few more days, neither Qi Ziyuan nor General Yuan can steal all of them out. Stable. The Imperial Palace has always been the world of the harem women. Before Bailey came, he was still worrying about how to get people out of the palace, because this was the most difficult thing. After getting out of the palace, Linen City is very big. Even if they couldn't get out of the city for a while, they could escape for a while. It's all useless. Mu Yangling gave him a reminder that the mothers and concubines of the fallen princes are still in the harem. The second prince killed his brothers, but did not touch their concubine mother. In the harem, except for the empress and 2 noble concubines who set themselves on fire in Cunning Palace, the other concubines lived well. This is also a common practice. Forced palaces rarely kill women in the harem, because men despise women from the bottom of their hearts. But in the field they are good at, women's energy and hatred will make them extremely powerful. Even if there is no opportunity given by Bailey and the others, one day, they will be able to make the second prince suffer by their own means. The second prince has just moved into the palace. His mother and concubine passed away a few years ago. The second prince has just taken over the affairs of the harem, and he doesn't even know anyone well. However, under the circumstances of state affairs and the siege of the city, the second prince obviously also no energy to focus on the harem. So the imperial concubines who had been in business for many years easily sent Bailey and the others outside the detention yard. Bailey didn't fight head-on with the guards guarding the yard, and directly asked the maid who came to assist them first to bring a scented sachet and wave it around in front of each guard, and then quietly sneaked up to knock people unconscious when their nerves were relaxed. The people behind dragged the fainted people into the yard, and they were guarded by them who had changed their clothes. Only then did Bailey enter the yard. Qi Feng didn't expect Qi Ziyuan to rescue him in this way. His eyes widened for a moment, but his mood was very agitated, and he almost wanted to find Wu Shi and the others without thinking. Bailey hurriedly stopped him who was excited. Qi Feng stared and said, "Why, he still plans to leave his mother and brother behind." Bailey smiled ironically in his heart, but said respectfully on his face, "Master misunderstood, but it's not appropriate to say anything at this time, it's better to inform the wife and second and third masters later." Bailey paused, and then said, "And this operation is in cooperation with the UN family, so." Qi Feng understood in an instant that Bailey still had to obey the orders of the UN family. That's right, how many years has Ziyuan been in power? He definitely doesn't have this kind of contacts, so he has to rely on the help of the UN family. Qi Feng didn't dare to have another opinion for a moment. Satisfied, Bailey turned around and went to Yuan's house. Mrs. Yuan and the others were much calmer, but they didn't trust them very much. Bailey showed General Yuan's handwriting to him, and said in a low voice, "General Yuan's people are waiting outside the palace at this time. You can understand it just by looking at the palace." "Then why didn't they come into the palace?" Xiao Shen asked. Bailey was silent. What did he say? said that he was unwilling to put the chief family's business in the palace and the relationship with the concubine in front of UN's spies. This is what he does. If he really wants to bring in the UN family's spies, he will be able to guess the cards in the general's hand after he leaves. Bailey will not do such a stupid thing. Sighed people. MRSUN was much more transparent, and said with a smile, "I'm sorry to trouble you, General, we will follow your arrangements." Bailey breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Then the old lady should clean up. As soon as the sky gets dark, the humble official will come to pick you up." Old Madame UN nodded slightly. But things didn't go so well. The abnormal state of the UN family and the chief family can be hidden from outsiders, but it cannot be hidden from the other 3 family members who live with them. It was the time when the wind was raging, and everyone was tense. There were no maids in the courtyard, only their personal servants, but no matter how big Wujin's courtyard was, there were 5 families living in it. Everyone watched with wide eyes, although they didn't notice. Bailey and the others felt that the actions of the UN family and the chief family were different. The other 3 families got together to discuss for a while, and when the sky was getting dark in the evening, each of the 3 families took 2 children to UN's house. MRSUN took a look at the 6 children, closed her eyes slightly, and sighed, "I can't decide this matter, but I can help you to draw a line." The 3 female family members who thought it was General UN who sent someone to save her did not expect that it was someone from Chiziuan who came to rescue them, and they were stunned for a moment. Bailey was anxious. Having 6 more children would be a lot more risky. What's more, the youngest of these 6 children was only 6 years old, and the oldest was only 10 years old. He had to assign a lot of people to protect them. But if they don't take over, I'm afraid they won't even be able to get out of this yard. There is never a shortage of people in this world who make trouble. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Humble job can take over a few young masters on its own initiative, but the danger is too great. I can't guarantee that they will survive." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yuzu. Chapter 546. Every night and early morning is the time when the palace cleans up the garbage. Bailey and others hid people in the dung truck and transported them out, while they found a place to change into the clothes of the guards and work as hard labor pulling the cart and went out through the side door. During this period of time, the palace changed guards diligently, and the biggest advantage was that they were not familiar with the hard labor. One of the guards felt that these people were too thin, so he took a second look, and Yunexu, who sent them out of the palace, came from behind and muttered dissatisfiedly, "Your speed is too slow. I chose you to watch. You are strong and strong now, but you are not as old and weak as before, so what use are you for?" Bailey could only bend down and beg for mercy in a low voice. The guard looked away and asked, "Are these newcomers? Why are there so many?" The miscellaneous family doesn't want to change, but the former members of the other family are either dead or injured, and the rest can't do it for more than 20 years, so they reselected some strong ones from their children and nephews. But who would have known that you can only eat and grow up, but you can't work, and you can splash out a piece of dung? What kind of place is this, that pickled things dare to be exposed outside? I don't think you will use it tomorrow, otherwise it will be I was so tired that I lost my errand. After finishing speaking, he complained in a low voice that the masters in the palace have been too strict in handling things recently, and their life has become more and more difficult. While Yunexu was complaining dissatisfiedly, the guards finished checking the token, and then knocked the dung truck casually to complete the inspection. The guard who was staring at Bailey also looked away, and waved, "Let's go." Yunexu waited for all the dung carts to leave the palace, and then muttered a few words in dissatisfaction, and then turned around, and he had to go back to deliver news to his master and empress. Bailey lowered his eyes, bent slightly and pulled the car out of the palace. He didn't realize that his back clothes were completely wet until he turned a corner and the guards behind couldn't see him. Said, "Let's go quickly and go to the meeting place." The others were also very nervous. Hearing that they pulled the dung truck out of the imperial city, the rest of the people waited for them at the intersection in front of them. Because they were counting the time, they could just avoid the patrolling guards when they got there. The three watched the wind, and the others pulled the dung truck into a small yard. Bailey opened the lid, pulled the people inside out, and said in a low voice, "Be quiet, don't let the neighbors hear you." Old Madame Yuen was lifted out tremblingly, only feeling dizzy, and she was given a hand by Shen to prevent her from falling. Madame Yuen smiled wryly, "I always thought I was in good health." Shen lowered her voice and said, "It's not Mother's fault, we would have been bored if we stayed inside, let's rest for a while." Although the excrement truck had been cleaned, it was still smelly inside, but no one dared to complain at this time. Even the youngest 4-year-old child was lying quietly in his mother's arms at this time, daring not to make a sound. Bailey went in and met the responders, and everyone just touched their heads briefly, and waited for the next batch of patrolling guards to pass by. The three families in the palace and the girls left behind helped cover it up. I don't know how long they can cover it up, so it's better for them to leave the city as soon as possible. The people in the yard only rested for a while before being led out through another door. This time they walked directly into the alley. There was no imperial guards patrolling here, but it was dark. Adults led children or held young ones. The child stumbled and walked for about 3/4 of an hour under the guard of the guards. The water in front of him was rippling, and the moonlight slanted on the water surface, reflecting a vague shadow. The family members were a little puzzled. Why did they come to the river? Bailey hoped that the palace could delay the time a little longer, but at this moment, the palace was in chaos, and the people in the palace had already discovered that someone was missing in the yard. The new emperor temporarily wanted to show his friendliness to the officials and family members, so he randomly ordered a few good imperial meals for MRSUN and other officials during dinner. Even if the new emperor is not recognized by outsiders, he is still the emperor, so when he rewarded things, the recipients had to come out to thank them no matter what, but the eunuch who came to deliver the dishes didn't even have the face of old Madame Yuen and Chi Feng. Seeing this, she has been blocked by the girl. Seeing that something was wrong, the eunuch just became suspicious when he was knocked out by the guards behind him. The eunuch who went to deliver food did not return for a long time. The head eunuch sensed that something was wrong, so he brought a team of guards over to check, but was attacked by the guards guarding the yard. The chief eunuch was furious, and it was only when the guards reminded him that he realized that those guards were wrong, they were not the previous guards. But there are so many guards in the palace, and they are always changing defenses. These days, they change every day. How can he know who is who? When they finally rushed into the courtyard, most of the guards who resisted were dead, and those who survived were also wiped their necks on the spot. They checked afterwards and found that it was a tall eunuch pretending to be, while the previous guard was knocked out and stripped naked and thrown in a small house. The eunuch in charge was about to explode with anger. Before he could get angry, the guards came to report that the Yuen family and the Chi family were all gone, and 2 children from each of the other 3 families were also missing. The eunuch in charge broke out in a cold sweat and couldn't even stand upright. Sure enough, as soon as the report was made, the new emperor became furious and ordered people to investigate immediately, and detain the remaining officials and family members in the yard. He wanted to make an example and let them tell the whereabouts of the escaped people. Who knew that he was with the new emperor at that time? But the queen said, "Your Majesty, if we kill them, I'm afraid that we will really end up enmity with several generals, so the loss outweighs the gain. If they don't kill everyone, they will still treat me like a bully." The queen laughed and said, "If you want to kill, you should kill them in front of those generals. That way you can deter 1 or 2, but now you can't kill them just to arouse hatred. Those 3 families have children among them, and they tried their best to send them away. If you go out, you will definitely not confess." But the new emperor said, "Don't worry about being few, but about unevenness. Each family has a lot of children, but only 2 are sent out. The queen's face froze. At night, the yard where the hostages were held was bloody, and the emperor asked the eunuch in charge to investigate. The chief eunuch got a hint, and directly pulled out a 7-year-old child and asked, "I'll ask again, how did you send people out? Who was involved?" Everyone was silent. The chief eunuch sneered, raised the knife and dropped it. The child screamed, his arm was cut off shoulder to shoulder. The child's mother wailed, rushed forward to snatch the child, and was suppressed tightly. The chief eunuch looked at her disdainfully, and asked, "Madam, let's talk, otherwise I'm afraid the child will be lost. You know, your son has not been sent out." As he spoke, the knife slid down a few inches and landed on the child's neck. The 7-year-old child was still young and couldn't bear the pain of the broken arm at all. He almost fainted from the pain, and the child's mother cried out with an "ah." The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 547. Chi Ziyuan just sat on the chair and closed his eyes for a while, and almost opened them when he heard the sound outside. "General, Bailey is back." Chi Ziyuan went out immediately. Everyone was wet, and many of them were wounded. When Bailey saw Chi Ziyuan, he immediately knelt down on the ground and said guiltily, "General, my subordinates are incompetent." Chi Ziyuan's heart was slightly cold, and his eyes quickly swept over, and found that Mrsun was still alive. After sweeping his eyes, he realized that something was wrong. His father was not there. Chi Ziyuan suppressed his thoughts, waved his hand and said, "Let the family members go down to change clothes first, and invite the military doctor to show the old lady and the child." Chi Ziyuan hurriedly greeted Mrsun, but Mrsun looked at him guiltily and said, "My good boy, you should visit your father first." Chi Ziyuan hurriedly rushed to the nearby tent. The military doctor had already checked Chi Feng slightly, saw him coming in and shook his head slightly. Chi Ziyuan paused, and then slowly walked to Chi Feng's bed. Chi Feng's breathing was weak. If it wasn't for the rising and falling of his chest, he could hardly be seen as a living person. An arrow in his chest was broken and he couldn't dig it out. Wu Shi was sitting down on the ground and weeping in a low voice. When she saw Chi Ziyuan coming in, she paused for a while, then threw herself to Chi Feng's side, holding his hand and weeping. Chi Ziyuan gave her a cool look. All her crying was blocked in her throat, and she couldn't utter a single sound. Chi Feng opened his eyes, looked at his son standing in front of the bed complicatedly, and remained silent for a moment. Seriously, he hasn't seen the son for 12 years, and since he left, he will send him a letter on New Year's Day. He turned his head and glanced at Mrs. Wu and his son and grandson on the other side, then turned his head and waved at Chi Ziyuan. In the blink of an eye, "You're already this big." Chi Ziyuan didn't miss the embarrassment in his eyes, but when he was about to die, Chi Ziyuan didn't expose him, but knelt down beside his bed after thinking for a moment. Chi Feng breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that his son would not give him face at this time. He said dryly, "Now you are promising, you can be regarded as the number 1 person in my Chi family." Chi Ziyuan was silent, but Chi Feng seemed to have found the feeling, and sighed, "Your mother in the spirit of heaven will be pleased to know that, when you were born, your mother searched all the poems and books, and finally named you Ziyuan. I just hope that you will be unyielding and have lofty thinking, and I left you with the word Chind in the end. I hope you have noble morals." Chi Ziyuan lowered his head slightly. "Mother has always placed high hopes on me and my 4th brother. I just hope that you brothers can uphold your mother's behest. Brothers and sisters respect each other, and support each other." Chi Feng continued shyly under Chi Ziyuan's gaze, "Father owes you so much. Even if you want to make up for it, it won't help now. Your 2nd and 3rd younger brothers admire you as much. Although you are not from the same mother, you are also close brothers. After your father leaves, you should take care of them more." Qi Xiaoyuan turned his head to look at Qi Shaosheng and Qi Saitai who were kneeling beside him. He was very unfamiliar with them. If he met face to face on the street, he might not know each other. But these two were his younger brothers. Qi Xiaoyuan has no affection for his half-brothers who are rarely bullied by him until now. But he will not disobey Qi Feng at this time, so he nodded and said, "Father, don't worry, I will take care of the two younger brothers." Qi Feng let out a sigh of relief. He really didn't expect that he would die so early that he had to entrust his two sons to the eldest son who had never had a good relationship. As soon as this topic was over, the father and son fell silent, and there was nothing else to say. Qi Feng felt a rare grief in his heart. He didn't like Qi Xiaoyuan anymore. This was also his son. He really didn't expect the father and son's feelings to be so indifferent. He felt that life was passing by, and he wanted to leave a few more words, so he said incoherently, "Mister, if you don't have one, marry another daughter-in-law as soon as possible and have a son." Qi Xiaoyuan was slightly taken aback, and then he remembered that he probably didn't know about Li Shi and the others' disappearance, so he asked with a sullen face, "Miss Li and the child?" Qi Feng's voice was slightly weaker, as if he lacked confidence, but he still tried his best to explain, "I was afraid that your daughter-in-law would be reserved, so I didn't let your mother take care of their affairs, and there are imperial guards guarding outside, who knows that people are still silent disappeared." Qi Feng raised his eyes to look at Qi Xiaoyuan. After all, he still doubted that it was Qi Xiaoyuan who got people away. Qi Xiaoyuan frowned slightly, his face was a little ugly, and he said, "Father, don't worry, I will help people find him." Qi Feng turned his head to look at Wu Shi and winked. Wu hurriedly got up and took his son, daughter-in-law and grandchildren out, and there were only father and son left in the tent. Qi Feng asked in a trembling voice, "Jint, tell the truth, father, Li Shi and the others, did you take them away?" Qi Xiaoyuan raised his head and looked at Qi Feng for a while, then said, "No." Just as Qi Feng breathed a sigh of relief, he heard him say, "It was Mrs. Mu who led Mrs. Li away." Qi Feng stared at him with wide-eyed eyes. Because no one else was present, Qi Xiaoyuan was a little more at ease than before, and said honestly, "How much does father know about our brothers?" Qi Feng's chest rose and fell. He pointed at him and asked, You want to rebel?" Qi Xiaoyuan didn't expect that Qi Feng was the first to think of this, but he still nodded and said, "Father is right, this is indeed the son's plan." Anger and grief flashed in Qi Feng's eyes. "If you want to rebel, what will happen to me? I'm still in Linen City. That's why my son promised to take care of my second and third younger brothers." Qi Xiaoyuan interrupted him, and said, "Father, my son is very sorry about this matter, but if I do it again, I will still choose like this. Take your wife and children, but give up your father." Qi Feng's eyes showed sadness. "Do you regard me as your father?" In this world, many people abandon their wives and children, but few abandon their parents. Qi Xiaoyuan asked fiercely, "Does father treat me and my fourth brother as sons?" Thoughts were churning in Qi Xiaoyuan's chest, but he still couldn't help questioning. He calmed down the anger in his chest, and he didn't expect that he would lose control of his emotions. He thought that after more than 10 years and life and death, he had already looked down on him, but he still cared so much. When he saw his father opened his mouth but didn't speak, his heart was filled with anger and joy at the same time, and he lowered his voice and said, "Father only thinks me and my fourth brother are a disgrace, and he never takes a look at him, but now he wants to ask me if I treat you as a child, father." "Father guides son," Qi Feng murmured, "I give you blood life. But if you give birth and don't raise it, is the father innocent? If there is no kindness, how can there be unfilial piety? I think I can't live with you, and I feel ashamed, so I will fulfill your wish and take care of the second and third brothers. So father, are you not ashamed of your mother? This marriage was planned by you. You can save your family for this, but you shamed me and my fourth brother and tortured my mother to death. Are you ashamed? Qi Feng couldn't help but see Zhu Wan's voice and smile in front of his eyes. His hands and feet were cold for a while, and he couldn't speak. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 548. Wu wailed loudly, and Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaitai also burst into tears. In contrast, Qi Ziyuan, who was standing with a sullen face, was much more indifferent, but no one dared to pick on him at this time. Reason. Rongxian stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder, and said in a low voice, "Chint, if you want to mourn, the barracks will depend on you." Qi Ziyuan remained silent for a long time, and when everyone couldn't help paying attention, he said in a hoarse voice, "Write a letter to inform Heiran that your father has passed away, and you must let him know." Everyone knew it in their hearts, thinking that he was sad and hard to express, and they were right. The general has always been a restrained person. From the corner of Rongxian's eyes, he noticed the change in everyone's expressions, and then he was slightly relieved. Afterwards, Rongxian found an excuse to pull Qi Ziyuan away, and said, "Many soldiers in the army are watching. I know you are restrained, but you have to show what you should do." He lowered his voice and said, "Don't forget, this is our reason for doing something." Following Qi Ziyuan's rebellion, Rongxian was always trembling, not because of the rebellion itself, but because he was too easily burdened by emotions. With Qi Ziyuan's ability and capital, and with Qi Heiran and Fan Zijin around, it is very possible for them to win the country, but whether they can hold it is unknown. It was because of Qi Ziyuan's temperament. Originally, it was most correct to hand over the rescue to Fan Zijin, but he didn't want to put Fan Zijin in a dilemma, so he gave up. At this moment they are going to raise an issue, and Qi Heiran has an army of 120,000. It should be the most correct to call him back, but because of the battle against Zixia, he does not want Qi Heiran to be infamy in the future, nor does he want him to uneasy conscience. He let Qi Heiran continue to fight Zixia on the front line. Of course, this may also be due to his benevolence to the people. But the successful emperors of all dynasties are so worried and indecisive, emphasizing love and righteousness. So Rongxian was frightened. He was afraid that Qi Ziyuan would not be able to act like a filial son and virtuous grandson, so he could only remind him on the sidelines. Qi Ziyuan sighed and said, "I am really sad when he passed away, but I just can't cry." But it wasn't pure sadness, he was relieved, and felt that this should be the case. After so many years, he didn't know how to get along with this father. The sadness on Qi Ziyuan's face was only for a moment. He quickly calmed down and asked, "How is General Yuan's family?" There were bruises, but they were not serious. Several younger children were frightened. Fortunately, the weather is not very cold now, so the problem should not be serious. Send the person to General Yuan. Rongxian was stunned. "Just send it over like this." Qi Ziyuan said, "Just send it over like this, General Yuan will be more grateful to us. General Guo's 2 grandsons will also be sent to him. You can draft the document tonight, and we will start the incident tomorrow. Should we call Heiran back? Our troops are too small. They left some people in Baidi, and only brought half of them when they came from Tongchuan Mansion, so the number of people was not large. If the King Qin who had originally besieged the city turned around and suppressed them, they would not be able to support them at all." Qi Ziyuan was only silent for a while before shaking his head. Heiran alone faced the 200,000 Zixia army, and he was already struggling to support him. If he really wants to bring them back, those common people will really have no way out. Try to delay the time and let Zhang Ziyi and Mu Shi bring their troops back. It is only 5 days' journey from Tongchuan to here. Don't forget, There are not many people in King Qin's army who have removed Yuan Jiajin and General Guo. We are not afraid of the second prince and Xixia cavalry in the city. Rong Xian knew that it would be difficult for him to change his mind after he had made up his mind, so he only thought about it for a while before going down. Qi Ziyuan just went to see Mrs Yuan, and with a simple greeting, he straight to the point said that he would send them to General Yuan's side. Both old Madame Yuan and Mrs Shen did not expect to leave so easily. They were stunned for a while, but Qi Ziyuan's mind was focused on tomorrow's event, so his expression was a little indifferent. However, Mrs Yuan and Mrs Shen thought that he was grieving for his deceased father, sighed, feeling more and more guilty. Ever since Qi Feng was shot by a stray arrow, Mrs Yuan has always been very guilty and uneasy, because she can't help but think that if there is no such a large group of people from the Yuan family as a drag, Qi Feng will have a few more protectors around him. Maybe nothing will happen. In addition, the resentful eyes on Wu's road made her even more uneasy. At first, she was worried that Qi Ziyuan would embarrass the Yuan family because of this, and put forward some unattainable conditions with General Yuan, but now seeing Qi Ziyuan, he just sent them to Yuan's army. There, I feel even more guilty because of my villainous heart. A funeral was going on in the barracks, so Qi Ziyuan didn't want Mrs Yuan and the others to stay here. After all, his barracks were not without danger. If something happened to Yuan's family, it would be a waste of all previous efforts. The Yuan family was quickly sent to the Yuan family's camp. General Yuan knelt down in front of Mrs Yuan and cried like a child. Madame Yuan is also tearful, she hasn't seen her son for several years. General Yuan was very grateful to Qi Ziyuan, and when he heard of Qi Feng's death, he felt ashamed and hurriedly asked his son Yuan Zhao to bring the funeral ceremony to pay homage. At this time, General Guo was looking at the huddled grandson in shock. He stepped forward and hugged them, his eyes were slightly red. After a long time, he let go of the two grandsons, raised his head and said to the Qi family who sent the two children over, seeing the two children, the old man felt agitated for a moment, "Please forgive me. This is human nature, General Guo, you are welcome." General Guo was silent for a while and said, "Please go back and tell you General Qi, if there is someone Guo who can help in the future, just give me an order, and I will die." His two sons had brought two grandsons and family guards to escape to look for him before, but they were chased and killed by Emperor Jinjian's men on the way. One child was taken back, and the other grandson died on the spot. When he got there, he was seriously injured and died. In addition, knowing that the old mother is still in the hands of Emperor Jinjian, he can only bring soldiers to King Qin. Now that he is old, it is obviously impossible to have another son. The possibility of the hostage surviving is too small. Now he has two grandchildren by his side. Well, at least with the bloodline inheritance, the only thing to see is whether I can rescue my old lady and the rest of the people. Although General Guo held out hope, he knew it was hopeless, so he was so grateful to Qi Ziyuan and dared to make such a big promise. After all, Qi Ziyuan allowed the blood of his Guo family to continue. And the next day, General Guo knew what he could do. Qi Ziyuan turned his back. In the eyes of men in this era, the most important thing in this world is the father, and the importance of filial piety and loyalty can be seen together. So Qi Ziyuan rebelled under the banner of avenging his deceased father, and most people in the world felt that he should do so. If Emperor Jinjian is sitting on the throne now, maybe many people will jump out and say that Qi Ziyuan is unfaithful, but now that Emperor Jinjian is dead, the second prince who killed the king and father is sitting on the throne. He is a villain in the first place, so everyone was much more tolerant to Qi Ziyuan, and instead condemned the second prince unanimously. But not everyone can accept it, and many people in General Yuan cannot accept it. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 549. If one were to be awarded an award for the greatest contribution to the Great Zhou, then General Yuan must be elected, and if one were to be selected for the most trusted official by the people, then General Yuan must be elected. Now the order is chaotic, Emperor Jinjian is dead, and the orthodox heir designated by Emperor Jinjian is also dead, leaving only the second prince who killed the king and killed his father. Some people hope that General Yuan can become independent, and they are willing to follow General Yuan to conquer the world. However, as General Yuan's subordinates for many years, they also knew that General Yuan was loyal and upright, so they could only take it slowly, but Qi Ziyuan turned against him at this time, and there was such a legitimate reason. If it was before, it would be the opposite. Even if General Yuan and Qi Ziyuan had a good relationship, General Yuan would definitely not tolerate Qi Ziyuan, but now that Qi Ziyuan has just rescued General Yuan's family, Qi Feng still died in the process. Just think about it, they hated General Yuan so much. But now that they have this thought, they will not give up easily, so they can only vaguely hint to General Yuan that they are willing to follow him. Seeing that his subordinates had such thoughts, General Yuan sighed, knowing that the situation of Great Zhou was over. If there was only one Qi Ziyuan, he might still be able to turn the tide and barely keep Zhou's country, but Qi Ziyuan's younger brother Qi Heiran now also holds an army. Even if he is only a general now, the number of people in his hand is real. All his subordinates rebelled, let alone other things. General Yuan was at a loss for a moment, not knowing what to do. Rebel. Then it was confirmed that the imperial court had been clamoring for his rebellious remarks, and Emperor Jinjian's previous precautions became reasonable, and he became a villain with evil intentions. General Yuan's eyes sank, and he completely cut off the road. Regarding General Yuan, there are 4 people who know him best in this world. One is his military advisor Shen Mu, one is his mother, Mrs Yuan, the other is Mrs Shen, and the last one is Qi Ziyuan. Although Qi Ziyuan didn't know as much about General Yuan as those 3 people, he could still touch General Yuan's bottom line. This is a man who values reputation and honor extremely important, so he didn't worry much about General Yuan after the incident, but was on guard. Pick up other Qin Wangjun. Because General Guo received Qi Ziyuan's favor, although he didn't expressly say that he would follow him, he would not attack Qi Ziyuan. It was an expression of his attitude. There was no movement from Yuan's army, as if he didn't know that the people living near the city gate were rebels. In the imperial city, there was a decree to pursue and suppress Qi Ziyuan, and an order was given to Qi Heiran's army to order his adjutant to take Qi Heiran down and bring the army back to the imperial city King Qin. The second prince's edict was in Qi Heiran's hands. He curled his lips and threw it directly into the fire to burn. Those so-called adjutants had long since died. Of course it wasn't Qi Heiran who killed him, he died in battle with Zixia when they charged into the fortress. The fight with Zixia was so fierce, coupled with the constant replenishment of fresh blood, the people in the army had long been disrupted and reorganized. Once Emperor Jinjian died, who would listen to the court's orders? Qi Heiran touched his unshaven face, and sighed sadly. I don't know if his son will recognize him, but he gritted his teeth with hatred for the Zixia soldiers who stalked and never retreated. Fourth Master, Fei Bai came rushing forward, panting, Fourth Master, the people we sent back reported that they were stopped by a group of bandits on the way, and there were more than 30,000 of them. Qi Heiran's eyes flashed with anger, there are only 30,000 people, and they came back in a hurry to report. Are they eating dry food? Isn't there 60,000 people? Run over. But Fourth Master, didn't you tell them to rush back to support the uncle, didn't you? Although the 30,000 people are not many, they can hold their footsteps. Grandma's Qi Heiran turned around twice, then suddenly turned around and asked, which boundary are Lu Dehe and the others in? What? Qi Heiran stroked his chin and said, since the eldest brother has turned against him, let's start recruiting troops. Lu Dehe is a fine man, he can be regarded as a general if he uses it well, he added, send them a letter, don't talk nonsense, leave some more people for me first, Scare them and tell them to make way, otherwise the master will never end with them. The eldest brother is still in Linen City, there are so many royal troops there, his little people will definitely not be able to support them. Fei Bai responded and ran to write Fei Ji's biography. The general who received the letter immediately dispatched manpower and began to attack the encirclement as if desperately. The rebels who surrounded them suffered heavy casualties for a while, and the Qi family army took Qi Heiran's flying pigeon letter and read it aloud, and stood on the battlefield and shouted to the rebels who had temporarily stopped fighting. Our General Qi said, "Whoever, if you dare to stop us from going to save General Qi, we General Qi will never end with him. If you don't believe me, try it." The person opposite was speechless for a moment. The people on this side continued to shout, "The 60,000 of us have all retreated from the Xixia battlefield. Only you, 30,000 who are skinny and can't even hold a knife, dare to surround us. Your leader. I want to use you to fill the grave." What kind of corpse pit to fill? I think their leaders think they are wasting food, so the ones used to practice knives for us must really be bloody. Turn around and go west. The Xixia captives are there. If you have the ability to go to that area to kill people, follow them. Killing us in front of us is nothing. The people over there became anxious. If you really want to tell them to continue shouting, the people here are afraid that they will turn against each other. These are foolish people. If they can confuse them, so can others. Don't think that being loud is justified. How can you retreat from the battlefield? Qi Ziyuan has rebelled, and you are just rebelling against the army now. Grandma, Bear, we are General Qi's people. His father was killed by the second prince's traitor, and his elder brother was surrounded. It is only natural for the younger brother to rescue his elder brother and avenge his father. Don't say that you are chaste women. Yes, aren't you also rebels? Besides, although we went to save General Qi, our General Qi is still fighting against the Xixia army at the front. Isn't it because our Qi family army is standing in front of you that you can make trouble here? You have already been chopped up by Xixia. If you have the ability to kill a Xixia dog. Our General Qi has only 60,000 people who dare to face the 200,000 Xixia army. What qualifications do you have to be here? He also stopped us from saving General Qi's elder brother. The scolding instantly overwhelmed the rebel army on the opposite side, and many people showed hesitant expressions on their faces. They didn't know if the other things those people said were right, but one thing was always right: Qi Heiran kept standing in front of them, blocked the Xixia army for the people in their area. Many people retreated quietly with weapons. The Reborn Wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 550. The Qi family army rushed all the way to Linen City. Except for the occasional imperial army blocking them on the road, the other rebels did not stop them. It only took 5 days to rush to the outside of Linen City. At this time, Qi Ziyuan had already fought with the imperial army. Woke up. The troops of Zhang Ziyi and Mu Shi had already entered the battlefield, but they just wanted to stay there without losing money. As soon as Qi Heiran's 60,000 troops arrived, they immediately let go. Qi Ziyuan was both happy and worried. You guys are here, can Heiran only bring 60,000 people to stop Xixia's 200,000 troops? General Qi Shen told the general not to worry, saying that he has his own clever plan. Zhang Ziyi was a little dissatisfied with this, and murmured to Rongxian, "This is the time for employing people, how can the little general not come back?" Rongxian had already heard the people who came back report the situation along the way, and said, "The little general resisting Xixia on the front line is also good for us. Among other things, we have a firm foothold in righteousness. Now the imperial court and Xixia are in harmony. Collusion, let the Xixia dogs oppress the people, and the other rebels and generals are doing their own thing. At this time, only the Qi family army is still resisting Xixia on the front line. Who do you think the people will stand on?" Zhang Ziyi was taken aback, "So, This is all calculated by the little general. Thinking of Chi Heiran's character, Rongxian shook his head and said, the little general should come from his own heart, but it is because of his heart that it is even more valuable. General Yuan was also saying to his subordinates in a complicated manner at this time, looking at Chi Heiran's behavior, we are not as good as we are. General. General Yuan raised his hand to interrupt the other party, and said, although Chi Ziyuan is against the army, the second prince is not orthodox. Now the Guo family does not have any particularly capable descendants, and the brothers are unwilling to support another Guo family emperor. In this case, we will go back to the Northland, and only wait for the world to be settled before we pledge our allegiance. The generals below were all silent, obviously opposing it. General Yuan sighed and waved them away. Father, I'm afraid the uncles just want to fight for their future, Yuan Zhao asked worriedly, will they take Yuan Jiajin away? General Yuan shook his head, Yuan Jiajin is so easy to take away, but it is understandable that they want to fight for the future. I have been suppressed by the emperor for many years, and the people under my command have not been able to get ahead. It is normal for them to have such thoughts in troubled times. Yuan Zhao bowed his head and remained silent. Because General Yuan had already expressed his attitude resolutely, the people below waited and watched for a while, and found that General Yuan really had no further ideas, and most of them had the intention of leaving. But at this time, the crowd was in chaos, and they really didn't choose who to be the leader, so they could only stay in Yuan's army and wait and see for the time being. As for Chi Ziyuan's side, because there were 60,000 more troops, he was calmer, so he found time to see General Yuan. Chi Ziyuan didn't beat around the bush, and asked General Yuan if he had any plans to win the championship. After getting a negative answer, the second asked him if he could pledge his allegiance to him. General Yuan was silent, and Chi Ziyuan also guessed the answer. The third question asked him whether he could return to the Northland to guard the border and wait for the world to settle down. General Yuan did not hesitate this time, and nodded in agreement. He had fought with Jingguo for half his life, and he planned to go back. With his ability and capital, after the world is settled, no matter who becomes the emperor, he will not be able to confront him. Only then did Chi Ziyuan stand up and bend down to express his thanks. General Yuan announced the time to go back the next day, and the subordinate generals became even more anxious. At this moment, news came that Chi Heiran had defeated the Xixia army and forced the Xixia army to retreat to the west of Yuan Shui. Not only the Qi family army, but also the emperor, the imperial army in the city was agitated. Several participating generals seemed to have made up their minds, and they came to General Yuan one after another, expressing their desire to stay and follow Chi Ziyuan. General Yuan had expected such a move long ago, and he agreed with a sigh. Afterwards, he sighed with Shen Mu, in terms of fighting, Chi Heiran's talent is far better than his brother's, and even better than mine. At Chi Heiran's age, he relied more on small battles to accumulate military merits. Even if there were battles in which the more won the less, there would not be such a huge disparity in the number of Chi Heiran, 60,000 against 200,000, he had no idea that he was how did you do it? Chi Ziyuan was very excited, Haoran's good news came just in time. Not only did many generals join General Yuan, but even General Guo made up his mind to be loyal to me. Congratulations, General, Rongxian said with a slight bend and smile, in this way, we will have many more available people. Chi Ziyuan's eyes flashed brightly, this is not the only surprise. He took out a note and passed it to Rongxian, saying, Zijin managed to pass it on, you see. Rongxian took a look and sighed after a long time, it feels like we are getting old, and we are not as good as two children. Chi Ziyuan laughed loudly, patted him on the shoulder and said, Jinyu is not old, without you, the allocation of food and grass for our army would be a big problem. Rongxian bowed slightly, and asked, when is the general going to do it? Didn't General Yuan leave the camp tomorrow? Then we will do it tonight, so that General Yuan can know our strength and make him a quicker choice. Chi Ziyuan said, let the soldiers rest now, and the sun begins to rest when going down the mountain. I bury the pot to make food, and after eating, I listen to the orders and set off. Because General Yuan and the others were going to set up camp the next day, they also had an early rest. Who knew that as soon as they closed their eyes, there was a loud shout of killing outside. General Yuan jumped up, simply put on a piece of clothing and rushed going out. Yuan Zhao was rushing in, and when he saw his father, he said excitedly, "Father, General Qi has rushed into Linen City." General Yuan froze and asked, "How could it be? The walls of Linen City are so high." "There is an internal response," Yuan Zhao said with bright eyes. "My son just stood on the uphill and looked at it." Although he didn't know it clearly, he saw that the city gate was opened from the inside. It should be an internal response. "Father, General Qi, if he enters the city, then he..." General Yuan raised his hand to stop his words, and said, "No matter what Qi Ziyuan does, our Yuan family will never get involved in the rebellion, restrain the soldiers, and set up camp at dawn the next day." Yuan Zhao was slightly disappointed, but still obeyed his father's order and left. The 1,000 household chief of the Forbidden Army, who was instigated by Fan Zijin, was rushing towards Qi Ziyuan with all his strength. Since he had already taken refuge in Qi Ziyuan, of course he had to leave an impression on him. At this time, Fan Zijin was sitting in the center of the flower hall, submerged in the water, listening to the news. Fan Siwen saw the scene when he heard the sound and came out to check the situation. His heart skipped a beat and he asked, "Nizai, what did you do?" Fan Zijin looked up at his father and said, "What do you think I can do?" Fan Siwen breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Fan Zijin say, "Father, the eldest cousin is rebellious. We are among the 9 clans. Now the new emperor is in a state of desperation. It's not our place, but as long as someone whispers in his ear, our family can only be imprisoned." Fan Siwen stiffened and asked, "So?" Fan Zijin showed his big white teeth, and said with a smile, "So my son helped my eldest cousin. Listen, did they come here?" Fan Siwen's body went limp and he almost fell to the ground. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 551. The guard ran in excitedly and said excitedly, "Fourth Grandma, the general and the others have attacked Linen City." "So fast?" The guard nodded excitedly. The news from Bailey said that Mr. Biao instigated a group of imperial guards and asked them to open the city gate. "What about the second prince?" The guard regretted. The second prince and Prime Minister Qin ran away from another city gate. Because they were covered by Xixia cavalry, they couldn't pursue them to the end. But if they occupy Linen City, the general can ascend the throne, right? Isn't enthronement quite a target at this time? In my opinion, it's more important to put down the war first. At this time, Rongxian was also talking to Qi Ziyuan about assessing the war first and then ascending the throne, otherwise they would occupy Linen City and ascend the throne as emperor, and they would become the target of public criticism. Qi Ziyuan agreed. The Xixia army has not retreated for a long time. It seems that the progress of Jin Kingdom is not very smooth. I don't want to recall Heiran, so I let him toss around the border. The second prince is still in the hands of the Xixia people. I will kill him. Only at ease. Rongxian responded and asked, "Do you want to bring Madame and Aling back to Linen City?" Qi Ziyuan thought for a while, then shook his head and said, "Let them stay there, it's safer." Li Jinghua, who was excitedly waiting to return to Beijing, was a little discouraged when she received the news. Mu Yangling comforted her and said, "Brother is also thinking about our safety. When the world is stable, he will definitely come to pick you up." Li Jinghua said a little depressed, I don't know when the world will be stable. I don't know when the world will be stable. The servants only know that if the eldest grandma and the fourth grandma don't care about it, the place where we live will also be unstable. The two looked up at Chen Ming's family and asked, "How do you say that?" Chen Ming's family sighed and said, "How else can we say that the world is in chaos? In the past, no matter how corrupt the officials were, they would always give us a way to survive, but now we can't. The county magistrate has raised the tax by 30% like crazy. Now it's time to get autumn grain, and our folks from 10 miles and 8 towns don't have enough food even if they hand in all the grain. Now there are people selling iron everywhere outside, and our small village is also trying to sell their daughters these days. Those who don't have daughters have to sell their sons, and our family still goes to the town to buy meat every day, and buy some fine grains from time to time, but many people are watching." Mu Yangling's eyes widened. "Well, the situation has deteriorated to this point, why didn't you say it earlier? Isn't it that you and Grandma are both worried about things in the capital? We, the head of the family, didn't expect the situation to turn so bad. Our ancestors lived here, and there has been no such thing for hundreds of years. The rent and tax are the worst. It's still the military salary that was apportioned once, but it's not as heavy as the tax." Chen Ming's family said again, "Our place is pretty good. I heard that the peasants in another town are even more miserable. Not only do they have to pay the imperial court's rent and tax, but also the landlord has raised the rent for those who have land. Even if you sell all your children, you may not be able to make enough money. They all lost their homes and went out as refugees." Mu Yangling and Li Jinghua looked at each other. Li Jinghua hesitated and said, "Why don't you ask Chen Ming to restrain himself, and don't forget to go to town, Aling, didn't you ask someone to raise chickens and ducks in the front yard? They are also older, right? Sister-in-law, that bit of chicken and duck isn't enough to fit between the teeth. If it's just us, it's okay to eat more vegetables. Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang are still growing, but they can't lack their food and clothing. Also, Xiaobao still has food and vegetables. I'm taking care of my body, some ingredients have to be bought fresh. Then, let's find a way to help, otherwise if there is chaos here, our family may be the first to be hit." Their family is the richest in several nearby villages. Mu Yangling thought for a while, shook his head, and said, "No, let's not say that we can't produce so much food, but if we can, and help a few nearby villages, people in other villages and towns may rush over. Then what should we do? Move." Mu Yangling looked at Xiaobao and shook his head slightly. Xiaobao was not in good health. He had been ill the last time he came here from Linen City. If he moved again, he might get sick again. She can find a relatively stable place, and if she moves again, how can there be a safer place? Mu Yangling patted her hand and said, "Sister-in-law, don't worry, the situation is not the worst yet, see the situation before deciding whether to move or not." Li Jinghua didn't really want to move, so she could only suppress her temper and continue to wait. Mu Yangling turned around but looked for the guards, and asked them to check the magistrate of the county and get first-hand evidence of the crime. The guards said, "This thing was still useful 2 years ago. Now that the world is in chaos, who cares about it? Fourth grandma, this evidence is of no use." "Then what do you say?" "It's better to cut off the county magistrate and execute the law on the spot," the guard muttered. Mu Yangling's eyes lit up, he knocked on the table and said, "This is a good idea." The guard stammered and said, "Subordinate, this subordinate is just talking." Mu Yangling glanced at him and said, "I didn't tell you to do it." Mu Yangling turned around and wrote a letter to Bailey, assassinating or something. This kind of thing should be done by Bailey, and there must be no trace. Within 2 days, before the tax and food of the villagers had been sent to the county seat, several notices were posted at the gate of the city, stating that this year's tax was exempted, and it was stamped with the seal of the county magistrate. The people in the whole county were in an uproar. The first feeling was that they didn't believe it. After confirming that the seal was correct, they happily spread the news. Even the remote mountain village where Mu Yangling and the others lived heard the news in the afternoon. Naturally, the news was brought back by Chen Ming, who often ran to the town. Not to mention that the villagers didn't believe it, even Li Zheng and the village head didn't believe it. They came to the mansion to ask Chen Ming, and Chen Ming swore to the sky, "It's true, the gate of the county is stuck, and many big families in the village say so. It shouldn't be. Why did the county magistrate suddenly exempt from tax?" Li Zheng and the village head were puzzled. Chen Ming said indifferently, "Whatever why, anyway, our village doesn't need to sell children and women, and we don't need to starve to death." Li Zheng and the village head were still a little worried. "If this is fake news, I'm afraid the big guys will have a lot of fun. It shouldn't be possible. The county magistrate's seal is stamped, and he can still go back on what he says." Chen Ming also hesitated. But no matter what the truth is, the preparations for the autumn tax slowed down, and those who originally wanted to sell their sons and daughters also stopped their actions and began to wait and see. As a result, within 2 days, Chen Ming brought back another news: the county magistrate died, and someone wiped his neck at home. It is said that the announcement was written by the murderer. The village chief was stunned, and hurriedly asked, "Does the announcement count?" Chen Ming shook his head. "There is no certainty in the county. Since we are not sure, let's not send it away, otherwise the food will be wasted." "Then, your boss didn't send it?" The villagers all looked at Chen Ming inquiringly. Chen Ming shook his head again and again. "No delivery." As soon as these words came out, everyone's hearts instantly settled down, and they decided to wait and see. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 552. This inferior county was completely bustling, and even the villagers who had lived in half-isolation came to Chen Ming to learn about the news he had heard from the town or the county. Chen Ming didn't dare to gossip about the master's family, so he chatted with others under the big banyan tree at the foot of the mountain. Chen Ming's family didn't have much restraint in front of Mu Yangling. After asking her husband for details, he came to learn from Mu Yangling, "Fourth grandma, you don't know, some time ago we were all afraid of death. If such a sum of rent and tax is paid, the villagers will not starve to death." The county magistrate came out to post a notice again within 2 days, saying the previous announcement with the county magistrate's official seal was done by thieves, and it doesn't count. The rent and tax are still collected according to the county magistrate's previous statement, and there is also a specified time limit. The county magistrate is still the master of our county. Why is he so disregarding feelings? What happened next? Li Jinghua asked curiously. Mu Yangling got up quickly. "Sister-in-law is here." Li Jinghua said with a smile, "Seeing that you guys are talking lively, come and listen too." After finishing speaking, he looked at Chen Ming's family. Chen Ming's family tensed up, and said respectfully, "As a result, the county magistrate also had an accident that night, and an announcement was posted outside, saying that there is no need to pay rent and taxes. Now that the court is in chaos, there is no way to send out a new county magistrate. So after discussing with several lords in the county, they elected a highly respected lord to take up the responsibility of the county magistrate. No, the official announcement was just issued yesterday, saying that the previous announcement about tax exemption was done by thieves. Let us not believe me, but this year's tax in the county is indeed heavier, and they say that the tax will not be paid for the time being, and they will notify after they discuss a regulation. Now we are all waiting, and I don't know if the tax will be less in the end." Li Jinghua turned to look at Mu Yangling, and asked with a smile, "Ling thinks so?" "It should be possible," Mu Yangling said. "The thief blatantly posted the tax exemption announcement, which showed that he killed the county magistrate and county magistrate because of their heavy taxes. If anyone comes out at this time, I'm afraid that person will not let it go." so even if the tax cannot be exempted, it should be no problem to reduce it. Otherwise, if no one's hands are clean, who knows if the murderer will attack them? At this moment, those who can talk in the county are indeed discussing rent and tax. There are 2 boxes in front of them. These are the things that the murderer placed at the scene of the 2 crimes. The criminal evidence also let them know the reason for the murderer's attack. Now everyone has been looking for various bodyguard bureaus to find out which bandit would do this, but there is no news at all. Everyone was even more shocked by this, and because of this, everyone was a little uncertain about the tax. The imperial court is already in chaos, and it is not known when it will be officially settled down. I am afraid that no one will occupy their poor village, so they can only manage it by themselves. But the county town also has a lot of expenses, among other things, the salaries of the subordinate officials, the repair of bridges and roads, and the relief in case of natural disasters and man-made disasters can only be paid from rent and taxes in the future, because they, a small county town, are engaged in business. There are very few people, and there is almost no taxation, so we can only hope for taxation, so this is impossible to avoid anyway. If it cannot be avoided, it can only be reduced. The key is how much. Everyone quarreled. After the initial worries, the villagers saw that the county had not given an answer for a long time, so they secretly took out some food that was used to pay taxes. They couldn't starve to death before paying taxes, right? Unexpectedly, the discussion in the county was over in the autumn, and it went straight to the beginning of winter. The topics changed a lot, and the gentlemen in the county hadn't come up with a charter yet. The villagers were not in a hurry anymore, and sometimes when they saw Chen Ming coming back from the town, they would ask casually, "Is there an announcement in the town? When does it say to pay taxes?" In the past, Chen Ming would shake his head, and then everyone would just laugh happily, but this time, Chen Ming nodded heavily and said, "An announcement has been made, and someone should come down to notify in the next 2 days, saying that there will be an announcement before the winter solstice. Finish paying, but the tax is only half of what was originally set." The villager who asked the question was taken aback, wishing he could slap himself and tell you to talk too much. Chen Ming sighed, turned around and dragged the donkey cart back, and told the owner the bad news. In order to cover up, Mu Yangling did buy hundreds of acres of fertile land in a few neighboring villages. These are all subject to tax, but the land opened up in this village can be exempted from tax for 3 years. She asked Chen Ming to inform Zhuangzi's steward to prepare the money and food for tax payment. If he could directly use the money to pay taxes, he would use the money, and he could not use the money to use food. There is nothing more precious than grain these days. The tax has been cut in half, and the villagers don't have to sell their sons and daughters, and they can still have some food left over, which can be eaten until Linchun, but there are still 5 months from Linchun to summer harvest. What will we do then? So after paying the tax, the village head and Li Zhang, even though they were still wary of the Zhu family, still approached Zhu's family and boldly asked for a loan, just hoping that the interest would be less. Both of them were worried, for fear that they would step into the road of no return, but in order not to starve to death, this must be done. Mu Yangling, who originally wanted no interest, closed his mouth temporarily, thought for a while and said, "It is not difficult for the villagers in this village to borrow food, but I am not sure about the interest." Chen Ming said that the villagers do not have enough to eat every year. For 10 months of the year, grain is mixed with chaff, and if you borrow grain this year, you may not be able to pay it back next year. The village chief obviously knew this too, and blushed and said, "Folks, please work harder next year, and you will be able to pay back. The big deal is, we'll sell everything." That would make me look like a villain. Li Zhang pondered for a moment, and asked, "The 4th grandma means? You also know that I have a 100-acre emperor in the village. It has just been opened for 1 year, and there are 2 more years where it can be rent-free. The land is too thin, and it has been hired by short-term workers all the time. The tenants can't go out. You have to borrow food. The interest is to rent my land. I will ask Chen Ming to talk to you later. As much grain as you borrow, you have to rent as much land for a period of 2 years. You have to plant whatever I ask you to plant. As long as you don't steal or cheat, the two, even if the interest on borrowing food is waived after the next year. As for the rent, I will only charge 50%, what do you think? Li Zheng and the village head looked at each other, and asked hesitantly, how long will it take to wait? You have to give me an accurate answer. They were afraid that Mu Yangling would tell them to plant something that took a lot of work, and after 2 years they would say that they hadn't done it well and ask them to double the interest or something. Mu Yangling smiled and said, it's not something that takes a lot of work. It takes less time than wheat. If you don't eat it or are not used to it, sell it to me. The price will not be less. Li Zhen thought for a while and asked, then, can you make a proof or something? He blushed and said, it's not that I can't trust the fourth grandma, but I also have a proof or something. Mu Yangling nodded, not to mention Li Zhen, I also want to establish evidence. In the future, as long as our affairs are formal, we must establish evidence. When Mu Yangling said this, Li Zheng and the village chief were both embarrassed and a little suspicious. Zhu Jie is so easy to talk to.